Good morning. I'm Charles Horioka of Kobe University in Japan. I'm very pleased to be able to take part in this symposium and to present my paper. I'd like to thank the Pension Research Council, Olivia and Anna Maria, for organizing this excellent conference and inviting me to take part. Unfortunately, my co-author, Yoko Nimi, who's also my spouse, was not able to attend this conference because of her teaching obligations, so I will I will be the one presenting our paper. So the tentative title of our paper is Aging and Debt in Japan. And let me give you a little bit of motivation, but I think everyone in this audience is familiar with this line of research. But Lusardi, Mitchell, and their co-authors have recently made the alarming discovery that people in the U.S. are more likely to enter retirement in debt today than in past decades, mostly as a result of having purchased more expensive homes with smaller down payments, and that this may threaten their retirement security. So the object of our paper is to analyze the borrowing behavior of Japanese households in order to shed light on whether or not this phenomenon, this Lusardi phenomenon, the increased indebtedness of pre-retirement households, is observed in Japan also. So let me skip the details about the data sources, but just tell you that in the first part of the paper we look at OECD, we use OECD data. In the second part of the paper, we use data from the Family Income and Expenditure Survey, which is one of the most commonly used government household surveys. It's the Japanese equivalent of the Consumer Price Survey, Consumer Expenditure Survey, sorry. So first, I want to look at an international comparison of household borrowing behavior. So this figure shows debt-to-income ratios for the G7 countries. And then the next figure shows the debt-to-asset ratios for the same countries. And you can see that regardless of the measure, the outliers are Canada and the UK, which have lots of debt, and Italy, which has very low debt. Those are the outliers. And Japan and the US are not at either extreme. They're both in the middle with moderate amounts of debt. As for trends over time, you can see that in Japan there's been sort of a decline in the debt levels over time in recent years, which suggests that maybe this problem of increasing debt is not a problem in Japan. But of course, we need to look more carefully at data broken down by age group to see if there is a problem. Well, it seems to have frozen up. Oh, okay. So now let me turn to the more detailed data on Japan from the Family Income and Expenditure Survey, broken down by age group. So first, I want to look at the pre-retirement group, which is similar to the people that Anna Maria and Olivia focus on. And let's see, this is the proportion of debt holders in the 50 to 59 age group. And then another figure showing the debt-to-income ratio. And let's see. Looking first at the proportion of debt holders, you can see that there was a increase from 1980 to 1985, but But since then, the proportion of households in the 50 to 59 age group holding debt has fluctuated, but has remained roughly constant in the 50 to 55% range. So no sort of a sharp increase is observed. If we look at the debt-to-income ratio, there was a sharp increase in the 80s and 90s, reflecting the increasing financial sector development. But since then, since about 2000, the debt-to-income ratio has also been relatively stable, although it increased slightly from 2010 to 2015. So the pre-retirement households in Japan do not hold inordinate amounts of debt, and there has not been a discernible increase in their debt holdings in recent years, suggesting that the phenomenon of increased indebtedness among neo-retirees observed in the US is not observed in Japan. But if we look at the much younger 30 to 39 age group, the picture is very different. And here there is some possibility that we need to be concerned. So I'm going to show you similar figures for the 30 to 39 age group. This is again the proportion of debt holders, proportion of households with holding debt. And this figure shows debt to income ratios. In terms of the proportion of households holding debt, there was a sharp increase from 2000 to 2017 from 51% to 62%. And then in terms of the debt-to-income ratio, you can see that, again, this also increased even more sharply from 2000 on, from 97% to 197%, so roughly a doubling of debt-to-income ratios. So households in the 30 to 39 age group not only became more likely to take out loans, but they also became more likely to take out larger loans relative to their incomes. So there was not much, there were not any noticeable trends in the 50 to 59 age group, but very big changes in the 30 to 39 age group. So we focused more on this 30 to 39 age group to try to find out what's going on. And we were interested in knowing whether this sharp increase in debt holdings after 2000 were due to housing loans or to other types of loans. So here, this figure shows housing loan shares for the 30 to 39 age group. And you can see that there isn't much trend, and the share of housing loans has been high throughout, in the 90 to 95% range. In terms of, this figure shows home ownership rates for the 30 to 39 age group, and you can see that the home ownership rate increased very sharply from 45% in 2000 to 62% in 2017. So both of these findings suggest that it's primarily that the sharp increase in debt holdings of the 30 to 39 age group is due primarily to housing loans. In other words, a structural change occurred around 2000, meaning that cohorts who are 39 or younger in 2000, namely cohorts who were born in 1961 or later, behave very differently from cohorts who were born earlier. And cohorts born after 1961 rely much more on housing loans than cohorts born earlier, and this has enabled them to purchase housing at a much younger age than cohorts born earlier. So in a way, this increasing debt of the people in their 30s is a good thing. It enabled them, it reflects the fact that they were able to buy housing earlier than older cohorts. So next, I want to look at the causes of this increase in the housing debt of the 30 to 39 age group. What is the reason for the structural change that occurred in 2000? Why were they able to take out more debt and buy housing at an earlier age? Well, we've identified three factors, although we haven't done a quantitative analysis of how important each of these factors were. One factor is tax breaks for housing purchase. Japan has a long history of various tax breaks for housing purchase, typically taking the form of tax breaks for housing loans. These were first introduced in 1978 and have been repeatedly expanded over time. They're slightly different from the way in which the tax breaks are structured in the US. In Japan, it's the outstanding, a certain percent of the outstanding balance of your housing loans can be taken as a tax deduction. A second factor that may have contributed is expansionary monetary policy. As you know, the Bank of Japan has been pursuing expansionary monetary policy since 1995 with a brief intermission, and this has led to a decline in all interest rates, including interest rates on housing loans. That has made it easier to purchase housing. And the third factor that may be important is reform of the housing loan market. The government used to be the primary source of housing loans. There was this Japan Housing Loan Corporation, which provided subsidized loans to housing loans to households. But the role of private financial institutions have expanded rapidly, and the housing loan market has been liberalized, which has expanded the choices available to home buyers and made it easier and more affordable for them to take out housing loans. And in particular, there has been a sharp increase in the share of variable rate mortgages. So to summarize, since 2000, these three factors that I've listed have played an important role in enabling households to purchase housing and to finance their housing purchases using housing loans to a greater extent than they could previously, and in enabling them to do so at an earlier age than previously. And as I said earlier, the fact that households were able to buy housing at a younger age sounds like a good thing, but is there any need for us to be concerned? I'd like to turn to that issue. The first concern is whether households are engaging in excess borrowing. Japanese households born after 1961 have relied much more on housing loans than cohorts born earlier, and there is a danger that these households will enter retirement with excessive debt 10, 20 years from now. So Japan may experience the same phenomena that Lusardi, Mitchell, and their co-authors have observed in the US, but that will occur later than in the US. Another potential concern is increased interest rate vulnerability. There has been a sharp increase in the share of variable rate housing loans, making households more vulnerable to interest rate increases. This figure shows the breakdown of housing loans by type, and the yellow part is the variable rate loans. You can see that there has been a very, very sharp increase in the share of variable rate loans, and this is a potential concern. And a third potential concern, I thought I should mention this because I know how dear and near financial literacy is to the hearts of Olivia and Anna Maria. There is evidence that home buyers in Japan do not fully appreciate the risks associated with variable rate housing loans, especially since interest rates have been kept low for so long. And I won't have time to show you the results in detail, but the one survey conducted in Japan showed that the sample here is households with variable rate mortgages, and you can see that a very high proportion of them do not have a very good understanding about the impact of possible interest rate increases on the loan repayment amount. And here's some further evidence that I don't have time to talk about. So as I'm probably running out of time, let me just jump to the summary and policy implications. So to summarize, pre-retirement households, households with a head in the 50 to 59 age group in Japan, do not have inordinate amounts of debt, and their financial health looks satisfactory, suggesting that this Lusardi phenomenon is not currently observed in the case of Japan. However, households with a head in the 30 to 39 age group have shown a sharp increase in debt holdings in recent years, due largely to the fact that tax breaks for housing purchase, reforms in the housing loan market since the early 2000s, and expansionary monetary policy have enabled households to purchase housing at a younger age than they could previously, and to rely more on housing loans than they could previously. So turning finally to the policy implications, Japanese households born after 1961 have relied much more on housing loans than cohorts born earlier, and there is a danger that these households will enter retirement with excessive debt. And households born in 1961 to 70 do not show unusually high debt burdens, even though they are already in their 50s, but we need to monitor the borrowing behavior of this cohort as well as younger cohorts over time in order to prevent the emergence of this Lusardi phenomenon in Japan. And one cause for concern is the Bank of Japan will normalize its monetary policy sooner or later, and that Japanese households have become more vulnerable to rising interest rates as the share of households who have chosen variable rate housing loans has increased in recent years. And this concern is compounded by the low levels of financial literacy of Japanese households. Thank you very much for your attention.